My name is Chief Marcus Williams, and for 32 years, I've served this community as a police officer. I thought I'd seen every kind of corruption, every abuse of power, every betrayal. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the day Karen Henderson tried to steal my family's legacy using forged documents, fake police reports, and a conspiracy that reached deeper into our small town than I ever imagined possible. This is the story of how one woman's greed nearly destroyed everything I held dear, and how justice finally caught up with her in the most shocking way imaginable. The morning of June 15 started like any other. I was sitting on the wraparound porch of my grandfather's lake cabin, watching the sun dance across Mirror Lake's pristine waters. This wasn't just any property. This was for generations of Williams family history. Built by my great-grandfather in 1924, every weathered board, every carefully placed stone in the foundation told our story. I inherited this slice of heaven 3 years ago when Grandpa Joe passed. He'd always said, "Marcus, this place isn't just wood and nails, it's our family's heart." And he was right. Every summer memory I had was tied to this cabin. Fishing with my father, teaching my own kids to swim, hosting family reunions that brought together relatives from across 3 states. The Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association had never been a problem before. Sure, there were the usual complaints about lawn height and mailbox colors, but nothing serious. That changed when Karen Henderson moved into the neighborhood and somehow maneuvered herself into the HOA presidency within 6 months. Karen was everything you'd expect from someone who demanded to speak to managers on a daily basis. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer clothes even for grocery shopping, and an entitled attitude that made her believe the world owed her everything. But her son Tyler was worse, 28 years old, still living in mommy's basement, and carrying himself like he owned every piece of property his eyes landed on. The first sign of trouble came on that Tuesday morning when Tyler showed up at my cabin uninvited. I was cleaning fish from my morning catch when I heard a car door slam aggressively in my driveway. "You Chief Williams?" he called out, not bothering with basic courtesy. "That's right. Can I help you?" Tyler smirked, pulling out his phone to record. "My mom sent me to inform you that you're in violation of HOA regulations. This cabin needs to be demolished within 30 days, or we're taking legal action." I set down my filleting knife and turned to face him fully. In 3 decades of law enforcement, I developed a good radar for trouble, and every instinct was screaming that this kid was up to something bigger than HOA violations. "Son, this property has been in my family since 1924. It was here long before any HOA existed." "Not according to our records," Tyler said, his smirk widening. "Our research shows this land was illegally developed. The original permits were never properly filed, which means this structure is in violation of county building codes." He handed me a manila folder stuffed with official-looking documents. "You've got 30 days to tear it down, or my mother will file an injunction to have it condemned." I flipped through the papers, my blood pressure rising with each page. Property surveys, building permits, environmental impact studies, all claiming my family's cabin was built illegally on protected wetlands. The documents looked official, complete with county seals and signatures. "These are forgeries," I said flatly. Tyler's recording phone moved closer to my face. "That sounds like denial to me. Maybe even threatening behavior toward an HOA representative. You need to leave my property now, or what? You'll arrest me, Chief." His voice dripped with mockery. "See, that's the beautiful thing about this situation. You can't use your position to intimidate us anymore. We've got connections too. That evening, I spread the documents across my kitchen table and began making calls. My friend at the county planning office confirmed what I already knew. These permits were fake. The signatures belonged to officials who hadn't worked there in decades. The seal was close, but had subtle differences from authentic county documents. But when I tried to access the official property records online, I hit a wall. The system showed my access had been suspended pending an internal affairs investigation. Someone had filed a complaint against me, alleging I was using my position as police chief to intimidate HOA representatives. My phone rang. It was Mayor Patricia Collins, a woman I'd known for 15 years and considered a friend. Marcus, we need to talk. There are some serious allegations being made against you. Pat, you can't be serious. The Hendersons are running a scam. I've got documents here that paint a very different picture. Official complaints about harassment, abuse of power, threats made against civilians. There's even a sworn statement from Tyler Henderson claiming you brandished a weapon during his visit to your probe. Retai, my world started spinning. That's completely false. I was cleaning fish. He filmed the whole interaction. Marcus, I'm sorry, but pending investigation, you're suspended from duty. Turn in your badge and service weapon tomorrow morning. That night, lying in bed next to my wife Sarah, I stared at the ceiling trying to piece together what was happening. Karen Henderson wasn't just trying to steal my cabin. She was systematically destroying my reputation and career to do it. We'll fight this, Sarah whispered in the darkness. We'll hire the best lawyer we can afford. But even as she said it, I could hear the fear in her voice. We both knew that in a small town like ours, accusations against the police chief spread like wildfire. Even if I prove my innocence, the damage to my reputation might be irreversible. The next morning, as I prepared to hand over my badge for the first time in 3 decades, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Your family's time at Mirror Lake is over. This is just the beginning. KH, at that moment, I realized this wasn't just about real estate. This was war. Driving away from the police station after surrendering my badge felt like a death march. 32 years of service, 3 commendations for bravery, and a spotless record, all suspended because of Karen Henderson's lies. But as I sat in my truck in the parking lot, watching officers I'd trained and mentored avoid eye contact, something shifted inside me. The grief transformed into cold, calculated determination. If Karen wanted to play dirty, she'd just picked a fight with someone who knew every dirty trick in the book. My first call was to Detective Lisa Martinez, my most trusted officer, and someone I'd known since she was a rookie. We met at a diner 30 miles outside town, away from prying eyes and loose lips. Chief, this whole thing stinks, Lisa said, sliding into the booth across from me. The Henderson complaint came through channels I've never seen before. Usually, civilian complaints go through Captain Morrison, but this one went straight to the mayor's office. What about the internal affairs investigation? Lisa glanced around nervously. That's the weird part. There is no formal EI investigation. I checked with Sergeant Davis. He handles all internal reviews, and he's never heard of this case. The pieces were starting to fit together. Someone with significant influence was pulling strings behind the scenes, using official-sounding procedures that didn't actually exist, but who had that kind of power in our small town. I need you to do something for me, but it has to be completely off the books. I said, name it. Run a full background check on Karen and Tyler Henderson. Go back 10 years, credit reports, previous addresses, any legal troubles, and see if you can find out how they're financing their lifestyle. The house they're renting isn't cheap, and neither of them appears to have steady employment. Over the next week, while I was officially suspended, I became a detective investigating my own case. I spent hours at the county courthouse, digging through real estate records, building permit archives, and HOA incorporation documents. What I found made my blood boil. The Willowbrook Estates HOA had been dormant for over 15 years before Karen Henderson mysteriously revived it. More interesting, she'd filed new incorporation papers that gave the HOA unprecedented powers over property disputes, including the authority to condemn structures deemed historically inaccurate or environmentally hazardous. But the real breakthrough came when Lisa called me with her background check results. "Chief, you're not going to believe this. The Hendersons aren't just skimmers. They're professionals. In the last decade, they've pulled this same scheme in for different states." Tyler poses as a concerned citizen filing complaints while Karen manipulates local housing authorities to condemn valuable properties. How do they get away with it? They target isolated properties owned by elderly people or law enforcement officers who might be reluctant to go public with accusations. In Oregon, they got a retired sheriff's ranch. In Colorado, it was a veteran's mountain cabin. Same pattern every time. Fake environmental concerns, forged documents, and pressure from local officials who don't want the negative publicity. My hands were shaking as Lisa continued. But here's where it gets really interesting. Each time, after the properties are condemned, they're purchased at auction by a company called Heritage Land Development. Guess who's listed as the primary investor? Karen Henderson. Bingo. But it gets better. Heritage Land Development has received over $2 million in federal grants for environmental restoration and projects grants that require them to acquire illegally developed properties on protected lands. I felt sick. This wasn't just theft. It was organized fraud involving federal money, but I still needed proof that would hold up in court. That's when Sarah came home with the game changer. "Marcus, you need to see this," she said, holding up her laptop. "Remember how Tyler was recording during his visit? I've been checking social media, and guess what I found on his TikTok account? The video was titled Intimidating a Corrupt Cop, Part 1. But Tyler had made a crucial mistake. In his eagerness to go viral, he'd posted the unedited version. The footage clearly showed me cleaning fish the entire time, never brandishing a weapon or making threats. More importantly, the audio captured him admitting the documents were part of a research project to identify illegally developed properties. There's more, Sarah said, clicking to another video. Part 2, Planning the Perfect Property Scam. This video was even more damaging. Tyler, apparently drunk and showing off for friends, bragged about the fake permits and forged documents. He even mentioned having connections at City Hall who would help pressure local officials. But the smoking gun came at the end of the video. In the background, barely audible, was Karen's voice saying, "Once we get the chief suspended, Mayor Collins will fast-track the condemnation. She owes us that much after what we did for her campaign." Mayor Patricia Collins, my friend of 15 years, the woman I'd endorsed in 3 elections, the person who'd suspended me based on fabricated evidence. I sat back in my chair, pieces finally clicking into place. This conspiracy went deeper than I'd imagined. Karen Henderson wasn't just a con artist. She had corrupted officials in our local government. That night, I called the one person I knew I could trust completely, FBI agent Rachel Torres, a former colleague who'd transferred to the Bureau's white-collar crime division. "Rachel, I need help. We've got organized fraud, conspiracy, and corruption of public officials. And I think I know how to catch them all red-handed. What do you need from me? Help me set a trap. Because tomorrow, Karen Henderson is about to make the biggest mistake of her life. The Millbrook County Courthouse had never felt so charged with tension. 3 weeks after FBI agent Torres helped me set up a controlled sting operation, Karen Henderson and Tyler were finally facing justice. But as I sat in the gallery, watching, the woman who tried to steal my family's legacy adjust her designer jacket with casual arrogance, I knew the real battle was just beginning. District Attorney Michael Chang, a prosecutor known for his methodical approach to complex fraud cases, had assured me this was an airtight case. We had the social media confessions, financial records showing the pattern of fraud across multiple states, and recorded conversations from the FBI sting. What we didn't expect was the team of high-powered attorneys Karen had somehow managed to afford. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Karen's lead attorney, Jonathan Pierce, began his opening statement with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the winning cards. What you're about to witness is not a case of fraud or conspiracy. This is the story of a corrupt police chief who abused his power to intimidate and harass innocent citizens who dared to question his illegal property development. My jaw clenched as Pierce painted me as the villain, according to his narrative. I was a rogue cop who'd built an illegal cabin on protected wetlands and used my position to silence anyone who challenged. And me, Karen Henderson, was portrayed as a concerned citizen and environmental advocate who'd risked her safety to expose corruption in our police department. The evidence will show that Chief Williams threatened my clients, used his badge to intimidate them, and when that didn't work, he conspired with federal agents to manufacture false evidence against them. Chang's opening was more measured, but devastating. The evidence will prove that Karen Henderson and Tyler Henderson operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise that defrauded property owners and the federal government out of millions of dollars. This case isn't about environmental protection or police accountability. It's about greed, deception, and the systematic abuse of our legal system for personal profit. The first day of testimony focused on establishing the timeline of events. Tyler took the stand wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Under direct examination by his attorney, he presented himself as a conscientious citizen concerned about environmental violations. I approached Chief Williams respectfully. Tyler testified, his voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable and non-threatening. I simply wanted to discuss the HOA's concerns about his property. Instead, he became aggressive and threatening. I feared for my safety. But Chang's cross-examination revealed the cracks in Tyler's facade. Mr. Henderson, isn't it true that you've been involved in similar property disputes in Oregon, Colorado, and Nevada? I've lived in several states. Yes, and in each of those states, you filed complaints against property owners, claiming environmental violations. Tyler's attorney objected, but Judge Patricia Kellerman overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Henderson. I believe in environmental protection. If I see violations, I report them. Chang moved in for the kill, and in each case, after the properties were condemned, they were purchased by Heritage Land Development, a company in which your mother is the primary investor. Tyler's composure cracked. That's just a coincidence. A coincidence that's made your family over $2 million in federal grants. The second day brought the social media evidence. The courtroom fell silent as Tyler's TikTok videos played on the large screens. Watching his cocky bragging about the perfect property scam was devastating. But Karen's expression was even more telling. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. But Karen's attorney had prepared for this. Peers argued that the videos were taken out of context, that Tyler was joking with friends, and that young people often exaggerate on social media for attention. Your Honor, these videos prove nothing except that a young man made some foolish statements while intoxicated. They certainly don't constitute evidence of criminal conspiracy. Judge Kellerman seemed to consider this argument seriously, and I felt my confidence wavering. What if the jury bought the defense's spin? What if Karen Henderson walked away from this? That's when Da Chang played his trump card. FBI Agent Torres's testimony about the sting operation. Agent Torres, can you describe what happened when your undercover operatives approached Mrs. Henderson about acquiring Chief Williams's property? Torres was professional and precise. Mrs. Henderson immediately offered to provide fraudulent environmental impact studies and forged building permits for $50,000. She also claimed she could guarantee favorable rulings from local officials who were in her pocket. The defense objected furiously, claiming entrapment, but the judge allowed the testimony. Agent Torres then played the recorded conversations, and Karen's voice filled the courtroom. Don't worry about the legal stuff. I've got Mayor Collins wrapped around my finger. One phone call from me, and she'll rubber stamp whatever condemnation order we need. The gallery erupted. Mayor Collins, who'd been sitting in the back row, went pale and quickly exited the courtroom. Several reporters followed her out, sensing a bigger story developing. But Pierce wasn't finished. In a move that stunned everyone, he called Mayor Patricia Collins as a defense witness. Mayor Collins, did my client Karen Henderson ever bribe or coerce you into taking action against Chief Williams? Collins looked terrified as she answered, No, absolutely not. My decision to suspend Chief Williams was based solely on the evidence presented to me. And that evidence came from what source? From concerned citizens reporting potential police misconduct. Ching's cross-examination was brutal. Mayor Collins, isn't it true that Karen Henderson's company donated $50,000 to your last campaign? Many local businesses supported my campaign. And isn't it true that immediately after that donation, you fast-tracked the approval for Heritage Land Development's federal grant applications? Collins's attorney, who'd appeared seemingly out of nowhere, objected, Your Honor, my client is not on trial here. Judge Kellerman's response sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Not yet, she isn't. As day concluded, I realized this case had grown beyond Karen Henderson's property scam. We'd uncovered systematic corruption that reached into the highest levels of our local government. But as I left the courthouse the evening, a process server handed me a document that made my blood run cold. Karen Henderson was countersuing me for defamation, harassment, and conspiracy. Somehow, even while facing federal fraud charges, she was still fighting back. The war was far from over. The final day of trial arrived with an unexpected twist that no one saw coming. As I sat in the courthouse that morning, FBI Agent Torres approached me with an expression that mixed satisfaction with concern. Marcus, we've got a problem, or maybe it's the solution we've been looking for, she said, handing me a manila folder. Our investigation into Heritage Land Development led us to something much bigger than we anticipated. Inside the folder were financial records that made me dizzy. Heritage Land Development wasn't just Karen Henderson's little scam operation. It was a subsidiary of a national company called American Heritage Holdings, which had bilked property owners out of over $50 million across 12 states. The Henderson family are small-time players, Torres explained. They're part of a network that identifies targets, executes the local scams, and reports back to the main organization. But here's where it gets interesting. The real masterminds have been watching this trial very closely. Before I could process this information fully, Duchang called me with news that changed everything. Marcus, Karen Henderson wants to make a deal. She's offering to testify against the entire American Heritage Holdings network in exchange for reduced charges. But first, we had to get through the verdict on her original charges. Judge Kellerman called the court to order, and I watched Karen Henderson's face as the jury foreman stood to deliver their decision. For 3 weeks, she'd maintained an air of confident superiority. Now, for the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant Karen Henderson guilty. On the charge of federal wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of forgery of federal documents, we find the defendant guilty. With each guilty verdict, Karen's composure cracked a little more. Tyler had already pleaded guilty to his charges in exchange for cooperation, but Karen had insisted on fighting to the end. Judge Kellerman's sentencing was swift and harsh. Mrs. Henderson, your crimes represent a callous disregard for the law and a systematic abuse of the trust placed in our legal institutions. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. But as Karen was led away in handcuffs, she turned back to look at me with an expression that wasn't defeat. It was warning. 3 hours later, I understood why. Agent Torres called me as I was driving home from the courthouse. Marcus, get to your cabin immediately and bring back up. I'd never heard that level of urgency in her voice before. I called Detective Martinez and asked her to meet me at Mirror Lake, then pushed my truck as fast as safely possible down the winding country roads. What I found at my family's cabin made my heart stop. The property was crawling with federal agents, but they weren't investigating a crime scene. They were protecting one. Someone had attempted to burn down my cabin during the trial, but neighbors had spotted the fire and called it in before major damage occurred. Agent Torres met me at the police tape perimeter. This wasn't random arson. Marcus, we found accelerant patterns consistent with professional work. Someone wanted to destroy evidence. What evidence? The case is over. Karen's been convicted. That's what we thought too, until we found this. She handed me a waterproof document case that had been hidden in my cabin's foundation. Inside were the original property deeds, building permits, and environmental assessments dating back to 1924, all proving beyond any doubt that my family's cabin was completely legal. Karen Henderson didn't just forge documents to support her scam. Torres explained, she also hid the real documents that would have instantly disproven her claims. But here's the kicker, she wasn't working alone. The final twist came in the form of Mayor Patricia Collins being arrested the evening the FBI had discovered that she wasn't just a corrupt official taking bribes. She was actively recruiting properties for the American Heritage Holdings network. Her job was to identify valuable properties owned by people who might not have the resources to fight extended legal battles. Collins provided inside information about vulnerable property owners. Torres explained as we watched the mayor being led away in handcuffs, elderly residents, out-of-state property owners, and yes, law enforcement officers who might be reluctant to make their legal troubles public. But the biggest revelation came when Karen Henderson, facing the reality of 8 years in federal prison, finally revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. In a recorded confession, she admitted that American Heritage Holdings had identified my cabin 2 years earlier, a prime target. The plan was simple. Corrupt local officials would create legal problems that forced property owners into expensive litigation they couldn't afford. Eventually, the owners would settle for pennies on the dollar rather than face financial ruin. "We've done this hundreds of times," Karen said in her confession. Marcus Williams was supposed to be easy, a small-town police chief who wouldn't want the negative publicity. We never expected him to fight back. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of my family's cabin, fully restored and legally protected forever, watching my grandchildren play in the same waters where I'd learned to fish. The American Heritage Holdings Network had been dismantled. With over 30 arrests across 12 states, Karen Henderson was serving her sentence in federal prison. But more importantly, the $50 million stolen from property owners was being returned to the victims. Mayor Collins received a 12-year sentence for her role in the conspiracy. And our town held new elections that brought in leaders committed to transparency and accountability. Why? As for me, I was reinstated as police chief with a formal apology from the city council. And I used my experience to create a task force that helps other law enforcement agencies identify and stop property fraud schemes. But the most satisfying moment came when Tyler Henderson, as part of his plea agreement, had to publicly apologize and make full financial restitution to every family his scams had impacted. Justice isn't always swift, but when it finally arrives, it's worth the wait. If you've enjoyed this story of corruption, betrayal, and ultimate justice, please subscribe to the channel and share your own experiences with property scams or corrupt officials in the comments below. Together, we can make sure Karen Henderson's story serves as a warning to anyone who thinks they can steal what rightfully belongs to honest, hard-working families.